Welcome to the Weekly Roar, coming live from the Lion's Den, helping new managers become great leaders and awesome bosses. And now, here's your host, Greg Storch.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Lion's Den. This is the Weekly Roar. Last week, I began my newest leadership series called How to Raise a Leader. And the Lion's Den was standing room only. And this week, we continue the series so I can speak to you about one of the toughest challenges a leader can face. You're about to find out what that is in just a second. But first, I'm Greg Storch, the founder of Lion Enterprise, a leadership development and coaching business where I focus on creating winning work cultures, one leader at a time. I'm a certified professional leadership coach and a certified leadership speaker and trainer. With last week's series kickoff, I spoke about one of the biggest responsibilities that we have as leaders. Do you remember what that was? That's right. One of the biggest responsibilities we have as leaders is to develop other leaders. During the episode, I covered 5 things for leaders to consider when it comes to multiplying other leaders. If you didn't catch that, then just head over to my website at lion-enterprise.com. Click on the Lion's Pride Library where you'll find video number 95 for last week. And while you're in the Lion's Pride Library, go ahead and check it out. It's a free resource, and it's really a great way for you to get more of the roar. Now that we have that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about one of the toughest challenges a leader can face. Leaders have to be creators, and one of the things they must create is an atmosphere where their followers can succeed. An atmosphere that will also attract other leaders. We can do that by supporting, creating, encouraging, and even leading change wherever we're at. Whenever leaders exhibit a positive attitude in an atmosphere that is also positive, it creates a space for others to achieve and grow. And what's more, when we get our teams to consistently produce excellent results, one accomplishment after another, well, that creates momentum for everyone involved. That's a great word, momentum. It serves as its own change agent, and it's necessary ingredient in the recipe for successful change in any organization. The reason I'm even talking about this today is because the fact is that some leaders don't even recognize the importance of creating the right atmosphere, the right environment to build new leaders. I want to share this story with you about the climate I created when I worked with one of the federal agencies in Washington, D.C. Now, I was the 7th program manager to walk in those doors in a year and a half. So I was already facing an uphill battle. The customers were not happy, and the contractors working for me were wondering how long I was going to stay there. Or maybe it was how long I was going to last. Talk about trust. There was zero trust for quite some time. I had to work really hard to build that trust and a climate that not only built confidence from my customer, but from my people too. After some time had passed and we went through some rough patches together, they learned and they saw that I was going to stick around for a while. So they started trusting me more and more. Over the course of about 3 or 4 years, I spent a lot of time building that climate where I could develop other leaders. I was in charge of 10 task orders, and I had a manager overseeing each one of those task orders. So here are some of the things that I did to create a winning work culture that was conducive to growing potential leaders. The first thing was consistency. Consistency builds trust. I communicated with the teams and I did it frequently. I held town halls to make sure they knew what I knew. I spent time getting to know my people. And when it came time to fill vacancies, I looked for opportunities to promote within first. I gave a lot of people the one opportunity they needed to excel, and they made some of the best managers. But how did I know I was successful at creating that atmosphere? Well, one day, the regional manager of one of the temp staffing agencies met me for a morning coffee, and he told me that the people that he had been placing on my contract for the 90-day temp period, they either didn't want to leave when the time was up, or once they left, they wanted so bad to be placed back on one of my teams. They loved working there because of the environment I created for them. So it's very important that leaders understand the importance of creating a work environment that encourages the growth of new leaders. If you think about it, I'm talking about the right environment and someone's growth potential. What does that sound like to you? That sounds a lot like nature to me, right? I love getting out in the yard and working on the landscape. I could spend hours outside. When we were still living in Virginia, I planted quite a few flowers and other plants around the house. Have you ever noticed that when you buy a new plant at like Home Depot or at Lowe's, that in the pot is a little tag that tells you about the requirements for the plant to thrive? It tells you how much water to put on it and how much sunlight that the plant should get. And probably most importantly, how much space you need to plant them apart in order to account for their full growth. Well, potential leaders don't come with little tags to tell you all of those things, but good leaders understand that they have to create the right environment if they want their potential leaders to develop and grow. If the environment is too confining, they're not going to fully develop. Here's the big takeaway for this. The environment dictates whether or not the new leader will reach their potential as a leader. And it's our responsibility to create that environment for them. Since as leaders, we're the ones who are charged with creating that environment that will be responsible for whether or not a new leader is going to grow and reach their full potential, I'm going to share 5 things with you today that will help you to create that right environment, an atmosphere that is conducive to the growth of our potential leaders. Let's begin by talking about how important it is for us to display the behavior we want other leaders to emulate. I've said it plenty of times before that people do what people see. Think of the first thing as going first. We're going to do what we want other leaders to do. Our values, our vision, our actions, they all become their values and their vision and their actions. What you do matters. And take it from me, when you're the leader, all eyes are on you. They're either waiting for you to slip up or waiting to take their cue off of you. I think Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "The speed of the leader determines the speed of the pack." That's right. We're the pace setters for encouraging growth in new leaders. I've talked about the importance of continuous, intentional personal growth and actions plenty of times before now. But that is where it really can impact our ability to create the right environment for new leaders. You see, we can only take people as far as we've gone ourselves. We can only take them as high as we can go on the ladder of success. This is why it's so important for us as leaders to keep growing so we can keep raising our own lid as a leader. If we stop growing, it won't be long before we stop leading. So, the first thing we want to do is display the leadership traits we want our followers to emulate. Remember, people do what people see. Part of creating a culture or climate that's appealing to potential leaders is modeling the behavior you want to see in them. Now, the second thing that's going to help contribute to creating the right atmosphere for potential leaders is to make sure we identify their sweet spots. Find the potential in each potential leader and cultivate it. There's a lot to be said for having confidence and belief in someone. When we do that as leaders for our potential leaders, it encourages them to succeed in whatever they're doing. When I was recruiting to fill the ops manager position on my IT contract, I reached out to an old Navy friend of mine. She had a phenomenal skill set of connecting with people. Now, when I called her about the opportunity, she had concerns about being able to perform in the position, and rightfully so. See, my friend had spent her entire adult life after the Navy in the dental sales industry. Now, she was very successful at it. She also knew nothing about IT. That was the first thing out of her mouth. I have no idea what I'm doing. I've never worked in IT before, she said. Well, I hired her anyway, and I had to fight to bring her on. I had to convince my leadership that she was the right fit for what I needed. And I told her that she had the skill set I needed for that position and that she could learn the jargon on the job. I had confidence in her abilities to do what I needed done. And at that time, I needed a connector, and she was great at it. You know, she's still with that company, and she's become one of their most successful program managers on staff. If you heard her in a meeting today, you would think she spent her entire life in the industry. How did she become so successful? How did she bloom where she was planted? Well, I'm convinced that it had a lot to do with my belief in her and her abilities. As leaders, when we focus on people's strengths, it results in their growth, confidence, and ultimately their success. The third thing that will help to create the right environment for potential leaders is to get to know your people. Know what they want. It's truly amazing to see what happens when leaders become genuinely interested in those around them. It's a great motivator for them. So, leaders must ensure that they aren't focused on themselves and what they want, but what the desires are of their potential leaders, and then help them to get it. Potential leaders don't really care how much their leaders know. That's secondary to them. Their primary driver that sparks their determination and action all stems from knowing how much their leader cares about them first. Mike Daniels was a young man working for me in Washington, D.C. on one of the contracts I was overseeing. Mike came to us as a desktop support technician. He was responsible for running around the building at this agency, going to people's offices to help them solve their computer issues. Whether they were locked out or they got the blue screens of death, Mike was there helping them out. I had many conversations with Mike. I would run into him in the hallways and we would stop and just chat. And sometimes I'd even take Mike down to the cafeteria and spend my lunch break with him. And through those conversations, I learned of his desire to join the Tier 3 IT engineering team. I was able to tell Mike what he needed to do in order to be qualified for that kind of a role. And he started by investing his off-duty time shadowing the engineer staff. He would stay late after work and he would be sitting right next to the engineers, watching what they're doing and asking questions, taking notes. And he also started taking coursework. About 6 months after I learned of Mike's desires to move up on the team, I had a vacancy to fill. Mike applied for that position, and you know what? I promoted him into it. And you know what? He busted his butt for me. He was very dedicated to the success of that team, and many occasions, Mike would tell me how he would never forget the opportunity I had given him. And I remember telling him that I didn't give him anything. He earned it. So get to know your people and learn what they desire to achieve. Showing a genuine interest in your potential leaders is just what it takes to spark their drive and determination to become successful. Now, the fourth thing is to remember that it takes one to know one. It takes a good leader to be able to see the potential leader in others. You have to know what you're looking for, so when you see it, you know it. One of the things I look for first and foremost is a positive attitude. You can tell by the way someone works with others and handles situations whether they have a positive attitude or not. And some of the other things that I try to spot in potential leaders is, do they have a growth mindset? Do they have integrity? Do they show loyalty? And can they exercise some self-discipline? But in order to spot this in others, you have to display those same characteristics yourself. Once you think you've identified a potential leader, dig a little deeper and keep digging until you find that leader. The more you grow yourself in leadership, the more you will look at things through a leadership lens. Having the vision of knowing what you're looking for will allow you to see the potential leader in others. I once held an interview for one of my vacant positions in DC, and we sat speaking with each other during that interview. And the more I spoke with the candidate, the more I began to realize that he would be underutilized in the position he had applied for. In the middle of that interview, I just stopped him and I told him that while he was overqualified for the position he applied for, I actually had another position, a management position that I thought he'd be an excellent candidate for. I could see that in him during the interview process. I asked him if he would entertain a discussion about the other position, and he agreed. So we spent another hour discussing that role and that I had in mind for him. By the end of that interview, I knew he was the right person for the job, and we ended up extending an offer to him that day. He turned out to be a great fit and ended up doing a lot of wonderful things for our customer. The thing is, I would have never known it if, one, I didn't know what I was looking for, and two, recognized it when I saw it. All right, the fifth and final thing I want to add is that as the leader, you can't be a commitment phobe. What I'm talking about is making a commitment to your personal growth. If you want to be successful, you're going to have to pay the price that comes with it. I'm going to tell you why I'm talking about personal growth when I'm really trying to talk about creating the atmosphere to raise other leaders. Now, you might be asking, what's the price I have to pay? What's this going to cost me? The answer is that it's going to cost you a commitment to lifelong learning, because leaders are learners. You also need to make a commitment to create an atmosphere where potential leaders can grow too. And that starts with our commitment to our own personal growth. So there's the tie-in. If you fail to make the commitment, your future as a leader will be limited because you'll lack the ability to not only grow more leaders, but others are going to stop following you. My previous employer offered every employee $3,000 for their annual training budget. That was for each person. I used my training dollars every year to invest in my personal development, which led to my growth. I also made sure those working for me were using their budgets too. You see, when an organization is willing to spend that kind of money to develop their employees, then it's a good sign that they're dedicated to providing the right climate for personal and organizational growth. Okay, so those are my top 5 things that will help leaders create that right environment for potential leaders to be able to grow and thrive. Now, let me wrap things up by sharing this thought with you. It just takes one leader to commit to self-improvement, to pay that price for growth. Just one person to be willing to lead. When you have a leader who does these things, they have the ability to create the right atmosphere for the leaders who follow in their footsteps. We have to become the type of leader willing to pay the price and create the proper atmosphere in which our people can follow us and become the leaders of tomorrow. And this is why creating the right climate for potential leaders is one of our toughest challenges. Okay, everyone, there you have it, the second episode in my new series, How to Raise a Leader. Now, I invite you to come on back into the Lion's Den next week as I continue this new series. Next week, I'm going to speak about the primary responsibility of a leader. If you want to know what that is, tune into the Weekly Roar next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Thanks, everybody, for supporting me and watching the Weekly Roar today. I appreciate you. Until we meet again next Wednesday, remember, everybody, be powerful, but stay poised just like a lion. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching the Weekly Roar live event at lionenterprise.com. If you enjoyed this video, please tell others to join us each week here in the Lion's Den. Thanks again, and see you next week.